Well, hi, everybody. We're back on the blog again this week with a special guest, someone that I've never met before. And this was our first interaction with each other, actually. I don't even know Tom Goodman online as of this point, but I'm very interested in his book. And so when he reached out to me about doing an interview and I looked at his book and read about it, I'm like, ooh, I like that sounds really interesting. So I'm like, absolutely, let's get you on the blog. So we're going to just start out letting Tom introduce himself to you and tell just a little bit about himself and his family. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Tom.
Well, I appreciate you setting up this interview with me, and it's good to make your acquaintance. You and I talked a little bit before this interview about your church work and a little bit about my church work. And congratulations, by the way, on your Genesis Award. I
Oh,
think it
thank
was
you.
this year, right?
Yes.
For the American Christian Fiction Writers. And um, I'm hoping that'll turn into a, a book contract for you real soon.
Thank you. That'd be
Um,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. I like the title of your blog and your website, Hope Filled Fiction. And I think that is probably a good umbrella term for so many of the books that you've featured on your blog and hopefully mine as well. As far as me, I've been in Austin, Texas for the last 21 years, serving Hillcrest Church, a Southern Baptist church in Austin. I've been a continuously serving pastor of Baptist churches for a little over 40 years in Texas, Louisiana, the Cayman Islands for a stretch. Um, my wife's name is Diane. We've been married for uh, 44 years. We have two boys that are adult young men now. One, actually, both live in the Austin area, and we get a chance to see them on a regular basis. And so I guess that's the thumbnail summary of who I am.
Yeah, well, that's good. It sounds like we have quite a bit in common too. My husband and I have been married for almost 43 years and in ministry, like you said, for a while. Not quite 40 years for us, but he spent 20 years in the Navy before he became a pastor. So
Yeah.
we had that going on. I also like to find out from the authors about hobbies. Like I know as a pastor and a writer, you're busy, so you may not have a lot of time outside, but any hobbies? And then I'm always interested to know if those hobbies make it into your books.
Uh, Good question, especially the last part of that question about whether hobbies make it into the books. Uh, so the things that I do for fun include fly fishing and scuba diving when I can, hiking and camping when I can. I probably should put when I can after every one of those hobbies as a pastor. Uh, I do think that one of the scenes in the early chapters during the manhunt when the bandits are being chased down, there's probably a lot of my experiences creek stomping as a fly fisherman that probably made its way into those Brazos River scenes. Mhm.
Yeah, that sounds fun. Scuba diving, you can have that. Like I that would terrify me. There's no way I'm going under the water like that.
I got spoiled rotten. I learned to scuba dive while serving as a pastor at First Baptist Church in Grand Cayman.
Mm.
And of course, it's like diving in bathwater there. It's 100-foot visibility. So spoiled rotten. I haven't done any scuba diving in Texas lakes. I'm not sure 3-foot visibility quite matches 100-foot visibility.
Oh yeah, I guess so. So let's talk a little bit about your writing. Tell us about how you started writing and when you started writing. Give us a little snapshot there of your journey.
Yeah. Well, uh, this is my first fiction. This is my first novel, but I've been writing all of my adult life. I have maybe about 250 articles, mostly in Lifeway publications, a lot of them most recently in the Stand Firm men's devotional magazine. My first first nonfiction book came out of my Doctor of Ministry project report. And it's out of print now, but it was picked up by Broadman and Holman and used in a number of pastoral ministries classes and colleges and seminaries. I wrote a book for seekers exploring Christianity called the Anchor Course, and I've used it in my evangelism work here. And I am continuing to do some nonfiction work with a 9 volume series that I'm in now called Bible Portals. Um, and it's partly evangelistic too. There are a number of people who they don't know very much about the Bible at all, but there's sections of the Bible that they're familiar with because of recovery groups or funeral services and weddings. And so, the 23rd Psalm, for example, or the Lord's Prayer. And so I call these things Bible portals, and just writing these short little books on that. I've got 3 out now on the armor of God and the Beatitudes in the Lord's Prayer. And I'm planning to have 2 out a year for the next 3 years. So I'm working on 2 for 2025 right now on the 23rd Psalm and the fruit of the Spirit. So that's been really rewarding. But this I decided to try my hand at novel writing as well, and so I'm uh, pleased with how well this has been received, this first novel.
Was that a big learning curve going from writing nonfiction to writing fiction?
It was. I mean, obviously, those of us who are pastors, we're in effect writing short nonfiction every week, as we are creating sermons that are an explanation and application of a scripture passage. Um, and so trying to flesh out a character's motivations, what the dialogue might feel like or sound like between characters. Yeah, it was a new experience.
Hmm. So, what inspired you to write fiction and particularly the genre of books that you're writing? So, tell us about your genre and why that genre.
I'm not sure I set out to be a historical fiction or historical crime fiction writer. I was absolutely in love with this story that my debut novel is built on. It's a true crime that took place in 1927 in North Texas, where I served as a pastor at one time. Uh, Absolutely loved the story, researched everything I could on it just because I'm a bit of a history nerd, and ended up writing it. But as it turns out, after that, I'm working on another early 20th century uh, true crime out of East Texas, and so I guess I'm a historical crime fiction author now. I'm not sure, but it was when I lived in Eastland County, which is for anybody familiar with Texas, that's in between Abilene and Fort Worth. Uh, it's a small county. When I was there, it was about 27,000 people all total. I was in the county seat also called Eastland, and the most famous true crime of that area took place in 1927. The Associated Press dubbed it the Santa Claus Bank Robbery.
Mm,
And almost from the start, it was known by that. And it was called that because the ringleader of the 4 bandits was from the city of Cisco, where the First National Bank was. And so he had to disguise his identity to rob the hometown bank. And it was 2 days before Christmas, so he thought it would be brilliant to disguise himself as Santa Claus. And it was supposed to be this easy 3-minute heist in through the front door, rob the place, get out through the screen door on the alleyway side of the bank, get in their getaway car and drive away. But citizens and lawmen discovered the bank was being robbed and surrounded the alleyway in front of the bank and behind it, and began shooting at any head that popped out of that screen door. And so the bandits took hostages, including 2 4th grade girls, and
mm,
used them as human shields to get out into the alleyway. They did make their way to the getaway car, and they took those 2 4th grade girls with them
mm,
and attempted to escape out of town. One was killed in the getaway. The other 3, after the largest manhunt in Texas, it took 7 days to find these other 3 guys, but they were eventually brought in and put on trial. And 2 were given the death sentence, and 1 was given life in prison. Um, just to shorten this as much as I can, 1 was executed by the state. 1 was lynched by an angry mob in Eastland County. And one turned his life around in prison. And of course, naturally, as a pastor, that caught my attention. But the thing that was fascinating to me about this story was the story gets told and retold in Texas Monthly, Texas Highways Magazine, major metropolitan newspapers in Texas, usually around Christmas time, not surprisingly. But it always ends at the lynching. It always ends at the death of the third bandit, and the the last man, the survivor, sort of disappears into history. And I would always ask when people would tell me the story, okay, you've told me about the guy that died in the getaway, and you've told me about the guy that was executed by the state, and you've told me about the guy that was lynched by an angry mob, but there's a last guy. He was given a life sentence. Did anything interesting happen to him? And indeed it did. At first, he was involved in some pretty spectacular jailbreaks, a lot of jailbreaks in that time in Texas work farms. Um, including one jailbreak where he and 12 other men dug a 60-foot tunnel from the kitchen to the other side of the fence. And he was on the lam for about a year and a half after that getaway, but he was always caught, and he eventually settled down. He actually had a Christian conversion experience, turned his life around so much so that he was given a conditional pardon only 15 years into his life sentence. And by the time he died as a 90-year-old in 1996, he had been a married, church-going model citizen for 50 years. And I wondered why did that never make it into the story as the true crime continues to be recounted, and finally decided I guess I was the one that had to talk about not just the deaths of the first three, but the life of the last man.
So that's the title of your book, The Last Man.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it's based on that one character, and it kind of follows him through this whole heist and how everything happened.
Right. And with my early readers, they were telling me, don't tell me which bandit ends up being the last man. I want to try to guess. And so that actually influenced some early rewrites in such a way that as people are reading the story, they're rooting for one character or another. And then of course, as each one of those characters passes away, sometimes readers are surprised. Sometimes people guess fairly early who the last man would be. But that makes it kind of fun for the reader as well.
And in the book, do you tell us what happened to the two girls?
Yes, and whenever I talk about this story at Rotary clubs or churches, that is usually the very first question during Q&A is what happened to the girls? And
I know
so
I'm just
I
sitting here
won't
this whole time saying, what about the girls? What about the girls?
I don't want to be coy at all in my answer. I'll just tell you that they were released unharmed, uh, and the guys made their getaway once they got the car out of town. No doubt those fourth grade girls were terribly traumatized, you can imagine, but they were unharmed. So.
Mm,
Unfortunately, the chief of police and one of his deputies was not. They were fatally wounded
mm,
at the front of the alleyway, in the back of the alleyway. And that was why this was a capital crime when these three men went on trial.
mm. So that sounds like a lot of research
Mhm.
that has to go into really digging into this and finding out the details. Like, how did you go about that? Where did you find all of the detailed information that you needed to make this book authentic?
Well, of course, when I first heard this story, I lived in the county, in the 1990s where it all happened in the 1920s. And there were still a number of people who had relatives who told them about their experiences in the robbery or in the manhunt. Uh, a lawyer at my church, he did the first will for my wife and me. His name was Bill Hart. His dad's name was John Hart, and he was the county sheriff when this crime took place. And so
Mm,
that was that was helpful to talk with some people who
yeah.
they knew of the crime from relatives' accounts. Newspapers.com is an incredibly useful resource for anybody who's writing historical fiction, because every newspaper, no matter how long it's been defunct, is now digitized, and you can research how people told a story back at the time and get a feel for what it would have been like to live at that time. Newspapers.com, really useful. The Texas State Library and Archives is based here in Austin, where I've lived now for the last 21 years. Really helpful staff, and they have some resources on the Santa Claus Bank robbery that have never made it into newspapers, as well as accounts of what prison life and the prison work farm life would have been like in the early 20th century.
Mm,
And the short answer was it was brutal.
yeah.
And so had an opportunity to learn about a lot of that at the Texas State Library and Archives.
Wow. That's so much changes over the years, and really going back and digging for a while. My husband was in the Navy for 20 years. I think I told you that before we started recording, but um, we lived on Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay Area
Hmm.
for a couple of years, and we could literally see Alcatraz,
Hmm.
out in the bay from where we lived. And we got to visit and tour Alcatraz and, hear all about a lot of the prisoners and some of the escapes, attempted
Hmm.
escapes and things. So it's very interesting. And I really enjoy this whole true crime
Hmm.
thing. Like I've always been a fan of shows that have to do with these prisoners and escaping, and
Hmm.
I don't know why, it just fascinates me. So I do
Yeah,
want to read your book.
true crime is having a moment right now, and most of the time, first of all, the true crime genre is regarded as nonfiction, and most true crime stories happened within the last 50 years or so. But it still counts, I think, as true crime to talk about something that happened 100 years ago. And
Mhm,
this this book is it very closely tracks with everything I found in the newspapers and newspapers.com. I had to make up the dialogue, obviously, between the characters, and I had to make up the motivation as to why they would engage in the robbery to begin with.
mhm,
Had to do a little speculation on the last man's uh, conversion experience and how that took place. Because when I first started researching the story, living in Eastland in the 1990s, well, of course, as I discovered later on, even if I'd wanted to try to find him and interview him, he died in 1996, right about the time I was starting to research this story.
wow.
So I would have, if just a few years earlier I'd heard about this story and started to try to see if the survivor was still around, that would have been a fun interview.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I know you mentioned he has a conversion experience, and I'm assuming that you add that to the book.
Mhm.
So I'm all about hope-filled fiction, which you mentioned. How do you go about incorporating hope into this kind of story or true crime stories, or what
Mhm.
else you're planning to write?
Mhm.
Without being preachy, because you hear
Mhm.
that term a lot, and being a preacher yourself,
Mhm.
you're pretty preachy, right? You're preachy every
Mhm.
Sunday. Um,
Yeah.
so how do you do
Yeah.
that in your books?
Yeah. I tell people who've asked similar questions to that it's not a quote unquote message book. I think all of us we as readers we kind of have a spidey sense. We have a certain resistance when we feel like somebody is in a really heavy-handed way trying to convey a message to us, and when we just really wanted to enjoy a story. So I kind of joke with people that, I save my preaching for Sunday morning, not for the book. However, I think there's a recurring theme throughout the book on fatherhood. A lot of the decisions, a lot of the actions are driven by bad or absent fathers or
Mhm,
good surrogate fathers, and of course, the uh, most dramatic moment. Hopefully, I think the dramatic moment in the book would be um, discovering the fatherhood of God, as the last character does.
mhm,
All all four of these characters had grace presented to them. And so this story is about grace rejected, but it's also a story about grace received. And when I've talked about it in church settings, I will use the story to illustrate the parable of the sower. Jesus, in the parable of the sower, there were four types of soils, but only one, and all four soils received or had, let's say, been exposed to the seed, but it was only that fourth patch of soil that, that bore fruit.
Mhm.
And so just like there were four patches of soils and Jesus's parable of the sower, there were four bandits in this book. And I found that a useful and hopefully compelling way to try to help people see yet another angle on the parable of the sower.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great analogy. So what was the hardest scene for you in this book to write?
You know, interestingly enough, I think the hardest scene was the good news scenes at the end of the book. The last two chapters of the book uh, close with a happy ending. One of my early readers said, "This book it's like Southern Gothic with a happy ending," which of course Southern Gothic has no happy ending. So he knew he was mixing genres there, but the book is so relentlessly grim and sad over bad choices and bad circumstances uh, until it suddenly turns right toward the end. And I did struggle after so long in writing, these grim sections of the book. I wanted to make sure that the good news, the happy ending, the happiness that the last man found was as believable as the sadness that he had experienced up to that point. I don't know if
Mhm.
that makes sense, but it was interesting that I found that that was hard. I've heard people say before that it is easier to write bad characters than good characters,
Mhm.
and I can imagine that's true. But I think it's maybe sometimes easier for some of us, maybe just depending on our personality, it's easier to write scenes of bad news than it is of scenes of good news. You want them both to feel believable.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we more easily believe the bad than we do the good. Because I know
Mhm.
this book that I'm getting ready to pitch is I had a couple beta readers say the guy's too nice. He's too perfect. Like he needs more flaws. I'm
Mhm.
like, well, there really are some people like that who are
Mhm.
kind and godly and do the right thing, you know.
Mhm.
But it's so easy to believe the bad in people.
Mhm.
That's pretty sad though when you think about it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had asked you in the questions that I sent ahead of time one of your favorite quotes, and you had sent me back kind of a little excerpt from the book. Do you have
Mhm.
that in front of you? Um,
Uh, I
you
have it over to my side here. Yeah, and I wasn't sure if this served as an answer to your question because a quote would probably be one or two sentences.
right.
This isn't a lengthy scene, but uh, I it's personally one of the scenes that I like. And if you're okay with that, I'll read it. It's maybe a paragraph and a half.
Yeah, I think it'll give
And
the listeners, readers, like just a little flavor of
hmm,
the book. So,
so here, the character Bobby is on one of the prison work farms, and he meets an old black man whose first name is Willie. And Willie was in for murder, as you find out fairly quickly. But he has become a Christian. In fact, the bunkhouses would have been segregated at that time with white men over here and black men over here, and he basically became the chaplain or the preacher for the for his bunkhouse. And uh, Bobby and Willie both work in the kitchen, and so Bobby, taking one of his breaks, just really enjoys listening to the singing and the preaching coming out of the segregated bunkhouse. So that I needed to set that up.
mhm.
Bobby got used to the daily routine and he found himself awake at 3 each morning without Hoppy shaking his shoulder. By the end of March, the captain let him exchange his striped outfit for the coarse white shirt and trousers that the other prisoners wore. The rheumy cough that had gotten Bobby sent to the wind unit had long cleared up. He wasn't sure whether that meant he didn't have TB or the symptoms had merely receded for a time. Either way, he remained with the knockouts, and he was fine with that. The only change to the routine was on Sundays. After breakfast, Willie held church inside his bunkhouse, and Bobby sat on the kitchen stairs by himself. He liked to listen to the singing that came from the open windows. Some of the songs were hymns faintly familiar to Bobby from Sundays at the boys' home. In other songs, a lone voice rose and the men responded in unison, accompanied by rhythmic clapping and defiant shouts in response to the lyrics. After the music, Willie preached. The volume of his voice rose and fell, helped along by affirmations from the men. The sermons Bobby remembered at Gatesville were lectures from well-meaning pastors with a visitor's pass. But with Willie, it was different. When he preached on hope or patience or courage, it was like he was offering to share a drink of clear water from his own cup.
Hmm. I love that so much. When I read that last part, I'm like, that is so beautiful. I can see why you love that scene. And I hope that will just give all of you watching this just a little flavor there of what you'll find in this book. And I feel like I could sit and talk to you for quite a long time about this book and about other things. There were so many more questions that we could ask and talk about. And the time has flown by. I can't even believe it. I think I looked at my watch when we started and I said, oh, we'll go about 25 minutes. And it's been 25 minutes already. So, wow. Um,
Well, I've enjoyed this conversation with you.
yeah. So, what I would like to have you answer as the last question before we say goodbye is, are you working on something next? Another book, or are you going to go back to your nonfiction, or are you going to stick with some fiction for a little bit?
I am continuing to write the short books in the Bible Portals series, but the next fiction that I'm working on now is also based on a true crime. In 1905, Groveton, Texas, which is a very small town in East Texas, and it the story is about a pistol packing preacher. There was a minister, I think it was with a Methodist church, and he was called to that to that church in that town, and found that the place was completely overrun by gangster forces. It was Prohibition era or before national prohibition. In fact, his first Saturday before his first Sunday preaching, he was responsible for the burial of a 17-year-old boy who'd been caught in the crossfire. It was just a really violent time in that town. And I'll shorten this considerably since we, like you said, been on the conversation for a while. But the long and short of it is he eventually leads a bunch of citizens of the town to basically take back their town. But he was advised by the sheriff he had to start carrying a pistol wherever he went, even preaching on Sunday mornings, because his life was under threat
Mm,
as he was kind of going against these forces that had made such a wreck of his town. And I thought, well, that could be interesting. So
mm,
I've written 3 chapters. It's very slow going,
mhm.
full-time pastor
Yes.
trying to write this and whatever a pastor calls his spare time.
Yeah.
But it looks like it'll be a fun story.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, I wish you the best with that and also with The Last Man. That's available. It's been available for how long has it been out?
It's been out 1 year, maybe a
Okay.
1 year and 1 month at this point.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So, and I believe you have a newsletter people can subscribe to.
Yes, thomasgoodmanwrites.com. I think you'll have it on the notes
Yes,
on
I
your blog.
will.
And people can get a free 26-page book called The Santa Claus Bank Robbery and Photos.
Mm,
Since this novel is closely based on real characters and real events and places, I just created a book of the actual the photographs of the robbers, the girls taken as hostages, the
mhm,
officers who were killed, the sites, that where this took place, and and that's available for free. I mean, if somebody doesn't read the novel, they can still download that for
mhm,
free for signing up for my newsletter. Although I will say that there are spoilers in the booklet, Santa Claus Bank Robbery and Photos. So if you want to be
mhm.
surprised at who the last man is, you probably want to read the book before
All right.
looking at the photo booklet.
All right. Well, again, it was such a pleasure meeting you and talking about your book, and it sounds fascinating to me. It's definitely on my radar, on my very long to be read list. I do want to read it. And anyway, I know you're offering a giveaway for one person here who comments, so I hope everybody watching here, you'll comment and take a chance on winning that copy and find Tom on social media and get connected with him so you can follow his publication journey and what's coming next. So, blessings to you, Tom, on all your endeavors and in your ministry at your church there in Texas. May God show up and show off in amazing ways.
Thank you so much for that, and the same to you for the work that you're doing with that church plant in Virginia, and with the work you're doing with let's see, it was at uh, Tanya, your
Okay,
agent,
Agent Tamala Hancock Murray.
Tam. Yes, Tamala. I got a chance to meet her at Blue Ridge Mountains Christian Writers Conference 2018, I guess it was, when I was first trying to decide whether or not to write this book. So
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Well, thanks so much. Be blessed, and I'll see you on the blog.
thank you. Take care.